It was July 2019. Special counsel Robert Mueller had just concluded his 2-year probe into the Trump campaign and its contact with Russian agents, and Mueller was set to testify to Congress about his findings. Mueller's upcoming date with Congress was heralded by many liberals as perhaps the beginning of the end for Donald J. Trump, the moment when a widely respected former FBI director would expose Trump as a corrupt, self-absorbed criminal. But Mueller's testimony turned out to be a dud. He wasn't exactly box office, offering no new revelations either, and no consequences for the sitting president. It was one of many televised moments in Congress where, again, many liberals thought wrongly, that's the end of Trump. In fact, the very next day after Mueller's testimony, an emboldened President Trump had his perfect phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in which he tried to horse-trade American missiles for dirt on Joe Biden. That call brought on the first presidential impeachment since 1998. Career civil servants lined up to testify against Trump as lead impeachment counsel Daniel Goldman told audiences on live TV Trump's actions had shaken the American government to its very foundations.
President Trump used the power of his office to pressure and induce the newly elected president of Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 presidential election for President Trump's personal and political benefit. President Trump's conduct sought to undermine our free and fair elections and poses an imminent threat to our national security.
This was going to destroy Trump's public reputation. Republicans would see him as a danger to America. But the impeachment trial ended the same way the Mueller investigation did, with no consequences for Trump. He was impeached by a Democratic House and acquitted by a Republican Senate, with only one GOP senator voting for the president's removal, Mitt Romney of Utah. Then Trump became the first president to be impeached twice after he implored his supporters to march on the United States Capitol on January the 6th, 2021, and try to block Congress from certifying his election loss. This time, even some Republicans in the Senate were mad. But even with 7 GOP senators voting to convict Trump, the vote fell short of convicting Trump for inciting a violent insurrection. Trump's ability to survive all of these public televised exposés of his behavior has even become a meme immortalized in one writer's viral tweet that imagines a critic saying, well, I'd like to see old Donnie Trump wriggle his way out of this jam. Trump then watching Trump wriggle out and replying, well, nevertheless. There have been so many hearings that liberals had assumed would be the end for Trump, and this week we'll get a new installment in that series. At 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, the Congressional January 6 panel will hold its first live televised hearings into how the Capitol insurrection happened. Could this time be different? Well, we've been promised fireworks by Democrats on the panel.
You're going to have to watch the hearings because the hearings will tell a story that will really blow the roof off the House.
The committee's vice chair, Republican Liz Cheney, promises new evidence and new witnesses who can speak to how the insurrection was coordinated and planned by the Trump team.
People must pay attention. People must watch, and they must understand how easily our democratic system can unravel if we don't defend it.
Must they, though? For half a decade, the quote-unquote hashtag resistance has, perhaps understandably, waited for the American public to completely, overwhelmingly sour on Donald Trump, even Republicans, the way they soured on Richard Nixon after the Watergate hearings. And even the Washington Post reporters who broke the Watergate scandal, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, now say that Nixon had nothing on Trump when it comes to corruption.
Trump goes to be the first seditious president of the United States, not just a criminal president like Nixon, the first seditious president of the United States.
But Nixon never had what Trump has, the almost unquestioned leadership of an entire political party and an entire right-wing media ecosphere, willing to boost his lies, obscure the facts, and demonize his enemies. In fact, the January 6 panel has chosen to launch its live hearings in the same primetime hour, dominated by Fox ratings star and booster of the Great Replacement Theory, Tucker Carlson. And we all know where Carlson stands on 1-6.
pretending that a protest was actually a failed coup is the Democratic Party's entire strategy to win this year's midterm election. Of all the things that January 6th was, it was definitely not a violent terrorist attack. It wasn't an insurrection. Was it a riot? Sure. It was not a violent terrorist attack. Sorry.
Will Fox take the hearings live on Thursday night? Who knows? But Fox viewers need to see them more than anyone else in America. We'll be airing them live on this network because they matter. They're important. They have huge value, regardless of the party political outcome. And whether or not Trump wriggles his way out of this jam, only time will tell. But the rest of us need to know the truth about 1-6 and about the insurrection and about Trump's role in it. Can these primetime hearings deliver on that? With me now, Daniel Goldman, lead counsel in the first Trump impeachment. You may also know him from his appearances here as an MSNBC legal analyst. He has left that role to run for Congress as a Democrat in New York's redrawn 10th congressional district. And we'll discuss that race in a moment, Daniel. Thanks for coming on the show. I do want to start, though, by talking about this week's big events and the historical precedents. You were lead counsel in Trump's first impeachment. You advised Democrats on Trump's second impeachment. They both didn't produce the outcome that Democrats wanted. Is this time different?
Well, I would take a little bit of issue with you on the first impeachment. I do think the case that we proved had an impact ultimately on the election. Many Republican senators acknowledged that we proved our case and they would let the voters decide, and the voters decided on Joe Biden. Of course, the second impeachment resulted because Donald Trump did not want to let the voters decide. And that's what these hearings are really going to be about. I think we have to put in context. This is not an impeachment. There's no trial. There's no punishment that will come out of these hearings or out of this committee investigation. What we are going to learn, I believe, is going to be new, significantly damaging evidence about Donald Trump and his close inner circle's role in the coup attempt and January 6th. And what I think that this committee is going to be able to do is bring transparency to what occurred. Accountability will have to come elsewhere, either at the ballot box or with the Department of Justice and any criminal indictments. But I do think that the narrative will be set forth by this committee.
We'll come back to the DOJ in a moment. You mentioned the word damaging. I guess we live in an America, tragically, that is so polarized and that is filled with such misinformation that damaging now depends on the eye of the beholder. I do want to ask you this. You went into that first impeachment hearings as a lead figure. You felt the pressure at the time. The House passed it. It goes to the Senate. I'm just thinking about, Jamie Raskin and others on the committee this Thursday. What do you think is going through their minds? How much pressure they under? Not just from their party, but voters, Americans, liberals, people who care about the future of democracy. How much pressure do you think they're under to really deliver on Thursday? What must be going through their minds as they build up to this big night?
Well, I think that they will feel a little bit like this is really their opportunity to get across to the American public. And I think that what they have done over the last year and the 1,000 interviews that they've done, which is just an unbelievable number of actual interviews. And we have not seen the transcripts to any of those. So we will learn a lot more. And I think they're probably pretty confident in what they know, that they will reveal a lot more. What I hope for, and I think many of them hope for, is not that MSNBC, Peacock, and CNN viewers watch these hearings, but that Fox News viewers and the people on the right will watch these hearings. And the fact that the first one is in prime time is very helpful, because what happened with our impeachment is that Fox News was able to package the Republicans' response, and they were able to present that in prime time, and it was a complete distortion of the facts. But hopefully
it's helpful. Well, let's see. It's helpful only if Fox agree to air them live. I find it hard to see Tucker Carlson giving away his hour to what he believes is a kind of illegitimate inquiry. It'd be fascinating to see what Fox does Thursday night. You're right to point the finger in that.
They should not be considered a news network, and they need to have that title removed from their. If they don't show these here, then they lose. whatever they claim
We
to be.
already on this show don't consider them a news network, and I call them Fox, not Fox News. Let's talk about the DOJ. Dan, last time you were on the show, we debated, you and I, the role of Merrick Garland and the DOJ in investigating Trump and his inner circle over January the 6th. You were more defensive of Garland. I was more critical of him. What do you make of the AG's reported decision this past week to go against Congress and not charge Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, with contempt?
Look, I am disappointed, but I'm not surprised entirely because Mark Meadows did provide a lot of information to the committee. He was the chief of staff, and he was the right-hand person for Donald Trump. There is some authority within the Department of Justice that indicates those sort of super senior officials, like the chief of staff or the deputy chief of staff, may be in a slightly different category. But I don't think this has any impact on whether or not the Department of Justice will charge any of these people for their involvement in the coup attempt, if the evidence does show that. And so I do think we need to separate this contempt of Congress investigation from the coup attempt investigation, which we now know to be active and DOJ to be engaged in that.
That's a fair distinction. Let's talk about your run for Congress in New York's 10th district, which covers parts of Brooklyn and Manhattan. It's a crowded Democratic primary field. Your opponents include former Mayor Bill de Blasio, plus sitting Congressman Mondaire Jones, one of the first out gay black members of Congress, and Yulin Liu, the first Asian-American woman to serve her district in the state assembly. I had Congressman Jones on this show on MSNBC last night, and I'm going to ask you the same question I asked him. With a stacked field like this, including the former mayor, why should people vote for you?
People should vote for me for a couple reasons, Mehdi. The first is, as the lead counsel on the Trump impeachment, which we just talked about, I was in the middle of the biggest fights, and I took on Donald Trump, and we proved our case. And that's important because I will be involved in the biggest fights. I will lead on the biggest fights, and we have many right now as our democracy is under attack. But it also shows that I was creative and effective in Congress in a way that we have not seen recently. And I want to bring that creativity, that aggressiveness to Congress to change what is going on, to change the logjam. And I think my other opponents are either former politicians or current politicians. But I bring an outsider's perspective with some success on the inside. And then the second thing, Mehdi, is that the public safety issues are so rampant right now in New York City. And as a former prosecutor for 10 years, I'm very familiar with law enforcement. I'm very familiar with these issues, having prosecuted gun trafficking, gang violence, mafia prosecutions. This is an area that I have unique experience in the field, and we need to reduce crime in this city in a compassionate way. We need to remove criminals, remove individuals who are arrested for nonviolent offenses from the system. We need to get them some diversion programs, get them some training. But we really need to crack down on violence and gun violence in particular, which is a scourge in our communities right now. Those are messages that I uniquely can bring to Congress. Those are experiences that none of the other candidates have.
We're out of time, but I have to ask very quickly, because you mentioned your experience as a prosecutor. A lot of people watching the show see the Democratic Party with different wings. You've got progressive prosecutors, some of whom are in maybe electoral trouble in California, or others who are doing well, like Larry Krasner in Philly. You've got Eric Adams, former cop, running as a tough-on-crime guy in your city. How would you define? Are you a progressive prosecutor? Because obviously, in a current age, criminal justice reform is a big issue for Democrats.
I think I would be considered a progressive prosecutor, but I feel very strongly that we need to crack down on violent offenders and recidivists. We should give people a second chance, and we should help them. We should try to get them out of the system with vocational training and education and mental health programs and drug programs. That is essential to reducing the prison population. But we really do need to crack down on gun violence and violence in general, because we cannot have a functioning society without security and safety.
Yes. It's funny that the Republican Party, which claims to be tough on crime, is never interested in gun violence.